Still rockin' after all these years.
This is the story of my rock and roll butler.
This is it, the show that started it all. Often imitated, but never equal. From San Francisco, USA, online since 2004, it's the one and only Rock and Roll Geek Show. With the original Rock and Roll Geek, Michael Butler.
Welcome to the Rock and Roll Geek Show. My name's Michael Butler. Thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate it. Today is Saturday, August 18th, 2018 at 7:32 p.m. when I'm recording this intro. Earlier today, I spoke with the great Dennis Dunaway, the bass player for the original Alice Cooper group. One of my favorite bass players of all time and one of the most original sounding bass players of all time. This guy has influenced so many people, and he does not get the recognition for being such an influential bass player. This guy was, if you're an Alice Cooper fan, you do not need me to tell you this. I mean, you know how great he is, and one of my favorites. He's got a book out called Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs. The paperback just came out. I read the book a few years ago, and it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and also I interviewed him like back in 2006 when he had his solo album, the Dennis Dunaway project, Bones in the Yard. Well, I was lucky enough to get him on the show today. I was reached out to by the publisher, I think it's St. Martin's Press. Last time I interviewed him, super producer Shane lined it up for me. Well, this time St. Martin's Press sent me an email and asked me if I would be interested in interviewing Dennis Dunaway, and I said, yes. So I talked to him today. I was supposed to talk to him for about 30 minutes. The interview went about an hour. He told lots of great stories from the book. We talked bass, lots of great things. And I came out of this interview feeling very good, even better about Dennis Dunaway than I did before the interview. I hope you like it, friends. He's also got a solo album he's working on, as well as a short film, which he's doing a Kickstarter for. I'll post a link to the Kickstarter. It's called Cold, Cold Coffin. He's doing it with, the short film he's doing it with Calico Cooper, Alice's daughter, and then he's doing a solo album. This is all part of the Kickstarter. He's also working on another Blue Coupe album. That's their third album. If you don't know Blue Coupe, that's Dennis Dunaway, a couple of guys from Blue Oyster Cult. They're a great band as well. I will post links to all that stuff on the show notes at rockandrollgeek.com, as well as where you can buy Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs. It is the best Alice Cooper book. It's even better than Me, Alice. I think you'll like it. It's also out an audiobook, and we talk a little bit about the audiobook as well on the interview. I think you're going to like this. I'm not going to play a song before the interview. I'll just go right into the interview, and then at the end of the show, I will play a song for you. Thanks for listening, friends. As you know, this show survives on donations, and without your donations, this show would die a horrible, putrid, stench-filled death. So please keep the donations coming. Thank you so much. Without any more of my yakking, here's the great Dennis Dunaway.
Hello?
Hello, can I speak to Dennis?
Michael?
Hi, Dennis. It's Michael Butler.
How you doing?
Good. How's it going? Thank you so much for coming on the Rock and Roll Geek Show. I really appreciate it.
You're punctual.
Yes, I am. I'm a little bit nervous because I actually had you on the show back in 2006. But
right, I remember.
I'm a little bit nervous because you're one of my rock and roll heroes, and for some reason, I get nervous when I talk to people who. I'm a bass player, and people who have a big influence on my bass playing, I get a little bit starstruck. So I apologize in advance.
Well, we'll get over that hump soon.
Yeah. The book is great, Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs. I read it 2 years ago when it came out. It came out 2 years ago, something like that?
It came out 2015.
Okay, 3 years ago. I read it when it came out. It's just now out on paperback, I think, right?
Yeah, well, since then, I narrated the audiobook,
That's right.
And then it was translated into German. Huh. And now it came out on paperback.
The audiobook, is that in German too? Somebody read that in German?
No. Boy. I have a copy of the German version, and I can't even I can hardly even read the title.
I listened to the audiobook as well, and the audiobook is great because you're reading it, right? You're doing
Yeah, and that's the hardest recording I've ever done in my life.
Oh, what was hard about it?
Well, when you're in the studio and you're recording song, you get all, locked in and you go for a take, and then you kind of can go in and listen and walk around and readjust and go back in and go for a take again. With the audiobook, it was 9:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon with hardly any breaks at all, no lunch break or anything. And you have to sit a certain position from the microphone, holding the book in a certain position for that whole time. You can't move. Even when you're driving for 4 hours, you can lean to one side and the other,
Did you have to stop a lot on like take two and things like that?
Oh, yeah. I can reel off the tales off the cuff, but reading aloud has never been one of my, fortes. And the other thing is when you're reading to yourself in your head, you don't need to find a place to take a breath. And there's some sentences in the book that I would get halfway through and be thinking, where's some punctuation here?
Right. Also, I think you have to make a conscious effort to read really slowly, right?
Well, not necessarily. You have to enunciate, and Audible had this guy there who was really good at what he did, and he would be in the control room reading right along with me, and anything that there was any kind of question about it, he would just stop me and we would do it again. And so I just kept barreling through like that, and they had booked 5 days, and I got it done in 4, which they said was pretty miraculous. And, and then they went in and edited it like crazy. The one thing I didn't anticipate, the chapter about Glenn Buxton was very emotional for me. And when I was narrating the book, I got so choked up I had to stop a few times and kind of, get it back together.
But that probably makes for the book to even be better in the audiobook. What I liked most about the audiobook is when you could hear the excitement in your voice when you're telling a story that brought back good memories, and the same with the Glenn Buxton. You can hear the sadness when you're reading that too. So it makes for a more exciting audiobook, actually.
Well, good. I mean, I kind of did that. They drugged me in there kicking and screaming because I thought, let's get a professional to read it.
No,
they're
it's
like,
better.
nope.
It's better with
they're
you
like,
reading
nope, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, boy.
So sitting in a recording studio for 6 or 7 hours a day for 4 days, that's got to be pretty tolling on the voice.
No, I was concerned about that. I had water, and also the studio was cold. It was winter, and it's a great studio, but there was like a draft coming in under the door, so my feet were cold and stuff, but maybe that kept me away. But no, I was concerned about that. It's like they say Mel Blanc did all of those Warner Brothers voices for all, Bugs Bunny and everybody, because he could just go day after day after day, where other people would come in and do a day and have to take a couple days off to get their voice back.
Did you listen to other people's audiobooks to maybe get some pointers and tips and things like that?
Yeah, but it's like saying, "Oh, I want to play guitar like Jimi Hendrix." Well, doing it is different than wanting to do it. But I did hear various styles and stuff. But basically, it's the same thing with when I wrote the book. I read other books and I thought, "Oh, I'd love to be able to write in the style of Mary Carr, who did the Liars Club," which I love that book, and I love her style of writing. But it's the same thing, Okay, well, I have a guitar, and Jimi Hendrix has a guitar, but I sound different than him,
Right.
So, what I did on the book is I went back and I said, you know what? this has got to be me. So I'm just going to write in my own style because when I first started writing it, I made the typical mistake of a new author or a new writer of having the dictionary out to make myself sound smarter than I actually am.
Right.
and then I went back and read some of it. I said, you know what? That's not how a rock and roll band, talks. I've got to really get honest here and really just tell the story as give a more realistic look at it. And that's, I made once that struck me, I had a team of people who were all on board to make sure that happened, and everything fell into place. So it was all good.
So you sat down and typed up the book yourself? Because a lot of guys, when they do rock bios, they'll just tell the stories to somebody and then they'll write the book for them. So you did the entire thing yourself?
It seems like I do everything the hard way. I turned in 150,000 words and got a 90,000 word book deal, which is standard for a new author.
Yeah.
So it was harder to whittle it down to that than it was to write it initially.
What got whittled out of it? Do you remember?
Oh, it wasn't all bad. There's a few stories there that I miss. The hard part was whittling it all down and make it still flow smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple of things where the paragraph that is no longer there changes the paragraph that is there. The meaning of the paragraph actually is different. So there's a couple of those, but it doesn't really matter because it really achieved what I set out to do, which was putting the listener or the reader in the car with the band while we drove around the Midwest trying to make it, and the those little minor things don't really get in the way of that.
Were there any complete stories that you had to take out?
Oh yeah, lots of them.
Like, can you give me an example?
For instance, when Alice and I were in high school and we were on the long distance team, we the team went down in the Grand Canyon a couple of times. Our coach took the whole team, and I mean, it was like a 20-mile walk. First you'd zigzag down the side of the canyon, and then you walk through these narrow canyons and all kinds of things happening on the way, like a dead horse in the middle of a canyon will smell for miles away, either way down the canyon. And the tribe that lived there would just come and light the horse on fire every day and to get rid of it that way. And because you couldn't bury it, it's rock, So anyway, stuff like that. And then Alice and I, there were tarantulas on the floor, on the ground. And so Alice and I slept on a cement table, and we had to lock our arms so that we wouldn't roll off when we were asleep.
To get bit by tarantulas.
Yeah, and they're all saying, well, that's a kind of interesting story, but not really,
Is it true that Alice has the world record in track and field of some event in Arizona?
When you see my new paperback, Alice wrote this gushingly flattering introduction. I told him it's so nice that I'm not worthy of myself. And he talks about how he could never run as fast as me. Well, I held the record at the school.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I held the 20-mile record at Cortez High School for many years after I was there. And somehow the story kind of transferred to Alice holding that record.
Yeah, there you go. That makes sense.
Alice was good. Alice was a 4-year letterman. I was a 3-year letterman. But I was, a year older than him and had a year more experience running. And I was a better runner. But some days he would beat me and some days I would beat him. But it's that bonding experience is what I wanted to point out in the book. When you run long distance through the desert in Arizona, there's a strong bond created. And when you're down in the Grand Canyon locking arms because of tarantulas on the ground. There's things like that we bonded. We're still best of friends after all these years, and there's never been any question of it. There's been rough times, but come on, it's like your family. Maybe you get mad at somebody one day and it's all okay the next day.
Yeah. Has there ever been talk of you actually playing bass as a regular in the band at any point? Like after the entire $1 Billion Babies Battle Axe album and all that, and after Alice went through his dark period, during when he was having drug problems during Dada and Zipper Catches and all that. Did ever talk about rejoining with him?
You mean me without Neil and Michael and everybody?
Or even with all of you guys, because, yeah.
No, well, actually there was 1 week when Kane Roberts was in the band.
Right, yeah,
And The World Needs Guts, and another tune that was on that album. Allison Kane actually came to Neil's studio, and we worked up, I think, 3 or 4 songs. So it looked like something was going to happen. And boy, that was tough. Talk about, I had a fever. I had the flu. I could hardly stand up without worrying about falling over, fainting and stuff. And we recorded those songs. I still have the track somewhere. We did another song that I wrote that I still haven't recorded properly yet, but called The Wild Ones. And they came out good, and it looked like something was going to happen, but I'm not sure what went wrong. Throughout all of these years, things come up.
Yeah.
We were going to do some American tour dates this year, and all of a sudden, then we're not. So, and the explanations are always so vague or unbelievable that you don't know what the reasoning really is behind it. But still, we did the tour in England last November.
Uh-huh.
That was 5 shows. Every crowd was just unbelievable. I mean, the energy was over the top, more than, I don't know what. I've never been to a Beatles concert, but it was kind of reminded me of Hard Day's Night or something. And we're not the Beatles, of course. But
in my opinion,
I mean, Wembley was 14,000 people. And the Tubes opened on the bill. So now the Tubes started out in Phoenix, Arizona. They all went to the same high schools, or in the same area. We all went to high school at the same time, and we all knew each other. We were all musicians in Phoenix, and there was a lot of camaraderie amongst musicians back in those days. And so here we are, we're playing England, and there's 8 guys from Phoenix, Arizona that all went to high school the same year, playing in England all these years later.
It's funny because Prairie Prince lives 2 blocks from me. He lives right around the corner from me in San Francisco.
Prairie's great.
Yeah, great.
We did there was a poster for the $1 Billion Babies tour.
That's right. Yeah, he did it.
Pastel colors. Him and Michael Cotton designed that for us.
Yeah, he's one of the he started the entire rock and roll T-shirts thing. He designed that Tubes T-shirt. I think was like one of the first band shirts ever done. Jeez, at least that's what he said.
Not only did they do that, but the Tubes weren't like the Rolling Stones or anything. And him and Michael Cotton they knew how to promote themselves, and they got those T-shirts into stores on Fifth Avenue in New York City.
Huh. Yeah.
But they also there used to be a bank right near Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller Square, where the ice skating rink is in New York City, near Radio City and all that. And there was a bank there that was all Art Deco, and Prairie and Michael painted the walls to look like this buildings at a slant, at an angle, kind of like the old Sap comics. And it was all Art Deco. And you think, okay, this old building, they managed to talk them into letting them come in and paint.
Huh.
The ceiling was like 3 floors high.
Yeah.
So they had to have scaffolding and everything. But, yeah, those guys, very amazing. And Prairie, right at the end of the British tour, the other guys were coming back to, Fee and the other Tubes guys were all coming back to America, and Prairie was continuing to play drums with Todd Rundgren.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, he's a great drummer, super nice guy, too. So there's some stories in this book. I wonder if have you done a lot of, people always ask you to tell stories from the book a lot, because I don't want to piss you off or anything by asking you to tell us.
No. Shoot.
Some of my favorite stories. My favorite story is when you guys were on. You did a TV appearance with Iggy Pop, and you did Black Juju. Remember that story?
Oh, right. Yes, that was the Cincinnati Pop Festival, which they called the Midsummer Festival, and it ended up being nationally televised because there was a baseball strike, and it was supposed to be a baseball game, but then when the baseball game was canceled, they decided to go ahead and broadcast this concert, which was funny because the broadcasters called the plays on this concert as if it were a baseball game.
Oh, nice. Beautiful. And here comes Alice. Oh, no, somebody hit him with a cake.
Exactly.
That's great.
And, the traffic were outstanding. It had everybody, Mott the Hoople,
really?
think.
Huh.
I think. I'm not sure. Grand Funk, definitely. Mountain, definitely. And I was standing in the crowd, that iconic picture of Iggy standing on the hands of the crowd pointing up to the upper deck like Babe Ruth might have.
That's from that show?
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
And I was right there, right next to where the photographer was standing, because I saw it from the same angle. Yeah, and we did Black Juju for the very first time. I had written the lyrics in Cincinnati when we were there, and then we got the gig, and I was discussing the arrangement of the song on the way.
Was this was this before Love It to Death came out?
I'm not sure. I think so. Yeah, it had to be, because the song was recorded for Love It to Death.
You had not recorded it yet. Okay, good.
No, we had never played it before.
Oh, okay.
We had played. I had written the instrumental part in Rochester, and then I thought I would wait until the right moment hit me for the lyrics, and it hit me in Cincinnati. So then I'm explaining the arrangement of the song, and Alice was looking over the lyrics to memorize the lyrics. On our way to the stadium, we discussed the song, and then we played it on national television. That's how fearless we were and willing to go out on a limb in those days.
And a testament to how great the band was, too.
Well, we were just experimental. We were very artistic that way. And we were also very used to, if something went wrong, we could flip it, so we had no fear of failure. And then the other thing, the funny thing about it, the Spinal Tap part, is that we decided that we were going to see, bodies need rest, so rest is like a bed. So we took the bed sheets from the hotel, and then Alice covered each guy with a bed sheet while we were playing. But what we didn't plan on is that, okay, now I've got a bed sheet over me, so how am I going to cue them to the ending of the song?
Right.
So it kind of just wimped out at the very end of the song. Where the ending wasn't tight because we couldn't see each other, but and I wore these clear plastic pants that Cindy had made for Neil. That there's the famous story about us trying to get arrested in L.A. so that we could get in the mainstream papers by wearing clear plastic pants. Well, I had Neil's on in that. I had I had some other pants on under them, but I wore Neil's pants at that gig. But yeah, the cake. So what would any other singer do if they got a cake in the face? It'd be pretty disastrous. And it wasn't exactly ideal for us either. But when Alice took a gob of the cake and looked at the audience like he was going to retaliate, it turned into this very intense theatrical thing. And he worked it out. You know, he made it work as well as anybody could.
That was one of the great things about the Alice Cooper shows back then. At least I've never seen, I was a little bit too young to see the band live back then, but I saw a lot of footage. One of the great things was the violence and the threat of violence. It looked like during that movie, Good to See You Again, Alice Cooper, which I know you hate, at least it says in your book you hate it.
Well, I wouldn't say hate. I think it's a really well-written book, but I think that it focused
I'm talking about the movie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I thought they made us were trying to make us into the Monkees, and it wasn't the image of the Alice Cooper group. And also the band had some really, I thought, great ideas of our own for a movie that would have involved Salvador Dali. And I was thinking, that's going to be a great movie. And then they brought in somebody else that decided we were going to be the Monkees.
Yeah, a little bit goofy in parts, but the live footage, there's parts in that movie, like, for instance, there's a guy in the audience that Alice kind of provokes, and the guy is flipping Alice off, and there's this threat that Alice is going to go down and punch the guy, and it was just like this tension live that it was so cool. And then there's one part in that movie where Michael Bruce leaps off the stage and jumps on Alice's back, and then there's like a fight ensuing on stage.
Yeah, the old fight scene goes way back to our early days as the Spiders.
Oh, really?
We did this, the rival band was Neil Smith's band called the Holy Grail. They were great. They did a lot of Butterfield Blues Band and even Mothers of Invention stuff. They had a very wide variety of songs that they covered, but they came off kind of like Stones sort of image. And so we played outdoor gig with them in Phoenix, Arizona in Cano Park. It's like a mini Hollywood Bowl band shell thing. And we followed the Holy Grail, and we considered ourselves the biggest band in town. Right. and Neil not only destroyed his drums, but he had written some offensive words, spray-painted offensive words on his drums. And the cops were there to haul him away, and the cops came out and took Neil away, and it created this whole big buzz in the audience, and we're thinking, we got to outdo that. So we decided that, Phoenix's lovable Spiders would have a fight and break up on stage. And so Alice had a mock fight with the drummer, and they stormed off, and oh man, the next weekend the VIP club was packed with people that were coming to see if the Spiders were still okay.
Oh, yes, that's great. Man, what good times back then. You miss those days sometimes, right? They're really good, exciting stuff. I still do, stuff like that, but back then we just had the chemistry was such that you had such different personalities in the band, but we all agreed on one thing. We would get people to talk about us, whether they liked us or not. They're not gonna walk out indifferent, and we all knew how to make stuff like that happen. To me, there was no more creative. You guys were the most creative and original group of all time. There was nothing like that. I don't think there ever will be anything like that again either.
Well, it has to do with goals. Do you want to be the greatest jazz bassist or whatever your goal is? Our goal was to do things that had never been done before. And therefore we put a lot of thought into it, but we came up with, several things that had never been done before. Now, you also have to keep in perspective that it was during the era of the Beatles. talk about a band that was innovative, So we were in the shadow of the British invasion, led by the Beatles with all of their innovation. Seemed like every time they came out with an album, there was something, it's almost like a different band. So, the bar was set high. Hendrix was going, the Who were going. We were out there, with bands like that. We had to follow Aretha Franklin once.
I think I read this in your book, but you guys played with Led Zeppelin at the Whiskey. There was supposed to be like a 5-night stand or something like that.
Right, yeah.
And you guys were so good that they canceled the rest of their shows?
Well, I don't know about that. They did cancel their shows, but they looked sick. They had the flu or something. Page and I watched their set from the balcony at the Whiskey, which was a very intimate room where you could see every tiny thing that's going on stage. And they did not look well. They sounded good, but it looked like they were struggling, especially Page and Plant. So I think they canceled because they were sick. People, but we weren't an easy act to follow because we had been in LA for quite a while, and we were kind of like the joke of LA, even though we had more gigs than most of the bands besides the Byrds and Love and the big name bands. We played at the Cheetah Ballroom. We were always there, stuff like that. But if you can conquer the Whiskey in those days, if you could conquer the Whiskey, you conquered L.A. And that was what we set out to do. And Neil did this crazy drum solo where the Whiskey used to be where the bands would have to come all the way from the balcony down the stairs and kind of in a tight quarters weasel their way through the tables and stuff to get to the stage and then awkwardly get on stage. And it really, by the time they got there, anything cool about their image seemed to have been deflated somewhat,
Right.
And so they built this thing from the balcony. It was like a hallway, and then they put, with wooden sides. So you would go down through this little, enclosed thing, and then you'd come out and you'd be on stage. So we decided that Neil was going to do his drum solo, then he was going to go inside this thing, and the spotlight was, and he was tapping his sticks on the floor of the stage, and then he was tapping his sticks. He went inside, and you could hear his sticks tapping on the side of the wood, and the spotlight just followed along the thing, and we had timed this all out. And when it got to the other end, just Neil's arm came out, and the spotlight was on his arm, and then he twirled his stick, and then he tapped his way back to the drums. And then he finished by falling backwards and landing on the GTOs, who caught, this was before mosh pits, but nobody had a chance of getting out of the way because the place was packed. And I remember looking over, and Robbie Krieger was sitting at the bar having a beer, and he raised his bar and toasted us on that.
Nice. So the GTOs, did they come to all the shows back then?
They came to a lot of our shows, yeah. They supported us. They would be there screaming, and it was great. Sometimes they'd be screaming while everybody else in the room were in line for the exits.
They kind of helped you guys get your deal with Frank Zappa's label, didn't they?
Well, Alice was going out with Miss Christine, who was Moon Unit's babysitter. So she lived at the log cabin. Actually, all of the GTOs lived in the basement at the log cabin in Laurel Canyon where Frank Zappa lived. It used to belong to the cowboy star Tom Mix. And anyway, it was a real log cabin with pine trees around, but it's right in the middle of Laurel Canyon in L.A. And so we talked Miss Christine into getting Frank to come see us, and 3 times he promised to come see us, and then he didn't show. One time he showed, and he had to leave before we played. So now we found out he's coming home, and we said, okay, we're coming over, and we showed up at their house early in the morning, and we barged in to miss the look on Miss Christine's face said it all. She was in shock. And we had our equipment, and we set up right outside their bedroom door. This is funny because everybody else in the band remembers that we set up in the basement, but that's not true. We set up right outside their bedroom door and started playing, amplifiers and drums and everything.
Did he know you were setting up? Did he know you were setting your gear up?
No, he had no clue. She hadn't even asked him if we could come over yet, but she said, okay, how about let's just say, 7:00, and I'll ask him, and then I'll let you know if it's not okay. And, and somehow by the time Alice and I walked all the way back to Topanga Canyon, he had turned it around to 7 a.m.
Right.
And so we stayed up all night boiling our strings, to help bring back some of the brightness and deciding what we were going to say to Frank and writing the set list and everything. And it's one of the first times we ever showed up on time, but we were there at 7 in the morning. And
was he expecting you guys at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m.?
He wasn't expecting this at all.
Oh, yeah.
She hadn't even asked him yet.
So did she say 7 a.m. or did she say 7 p.m.?
She meant 7 p.m.
Oh, yeah. So you
but
guys...
she said 7, assuming, of course, we're not going to show up at 7 a.m.
But you did. So did he come out of his bedroom when the music's blasting, or did she not?
This image has been so burned in my memory. The door cracked open, and just his hand reached out and motioned for us to stop. And then we stopped, and then the door opened a little more, and he stuck his head out and said, "Let me have some coffee, and then I'll listen."
Wow, that took some balls, man.
Yeah, I know. I'd shoot somebody if they tried that on me.
Wow. Did anybody date Miss Pamela?
Well, like everybody, no. Miss Pamela it was platonic, We loved the GTOs, and it kind of came as a whole thing. Alice went out with Miss Christine. That was the most official, relationship amongst them. Pamela was just so darn cute and good looking, but her sights were set on, people like Jimmy Page, right, and things like that. And she was just not hard on the eyes.
The GTOs,
as they say.
The GTOs really did a lot for the LA music scene back then, didn't they?
Well, back then there were the hippies and there were the freaks.
Yeah.
And Frank Zappa and the Mothers were the epitome of the freaks, the spokespeople of the freaks.
Till you guys came around.
Well, we were more like freaks, but we made fun of everybody.
Right.
In LA then, you didn't want to make the mistake of calling a hippie a freak, or even worse, calling a freak a hippie, even though they had the same kind of goals, anti-establishment and all that. There was something more artistic about the freaks and something brainier about the freaks. And so the GTOs definitely fell into that category. And the first time we saw them, we were just walking down and we dressed pretty crazy on the streets back in those days. We were out to make people go home talking about us, whether they heard us play or not, and so we were walking down the street, and it was like broad daylight in LA, and here comes the GTOs, and it looks like the circus just arrived, and we're going, those are kindred spirits if I ever saw any, and because we came from where the cowboys were throwing darts at us and trying to run us off the road with their pickups and all that. So we gravitated, we met them, and they said, "Oh, there's a party, you want to go?" And we're like, "Well, we don't have a car." And they're like, "Neither do we, we're walking, come on." And we went and met Miss Mercy, who was like, she had these raccoon kind of eyes with all of her makeup, and she had just all kinds of stuff hanging off of her like a gypsy, and and she had the mouth of a drill sergeant. I mean, it was shocking.
They probably thought
but
you guys were kindred spirits too.
They did. We became friends immediately, and and then we're asking them where the local thrift stores are in LA, and they took us, and that's because we used to go to the thrift stores in Arizona and buy our clothes from the women's section. So when we got to LA, we needed some new clothes, and we went, and also because it was cheaper. But the GTOs were definitely, if you went to the whiskey and the GTOs were there, then you knew that you were where things were happening. Like Rodney Binghamheimer too. Rodney Binghamheimer was just a super groupie fan who always knew what the coolest thing in town was. So if Rodney wasn't there, you worried that you weren't at the coolest thing that was going on in town.
You knew it was a good band to play. If those guys were there, you knew it was a good band going to be on the bill.
Right. Well, if Rodney's status became so important that people wanted to make sure he was at their show, and they would pay Rodney to be at their show because if he wasn't there, then it didn't look good for them. He was like the seal of approval that they're the best thing going on. So, and the GTOs were just a lot of fun to be around, and but mostly it was everything in that world, in the freak world in LA, evolved around Frank Zappa.
Yeah, and there's a story in the book, too, about Jim Morrison taking a walk from, like, the beach all the way down to Hollywood.
Yeah, well, we used to do that all the time. So
he did it in his bare feet.
The Doors came over to our house. This was Halloween 1967, I think.
Wow, maybe your memory is impeccable,
man. Maybe 68. Well, I know it was Halloween because we had a seance at our house. We had a Halloween party and a seance, and the Doors were there. Paul Rothschild, the producer, Alvin Lee, David Crosby, people like that came over to the Alice Cooper house in Topanga Canyon, and we had a party, with a seance and everything. And then when the Doors were ready to leave, then they're going to get in their limousine and drive off. And Glenn Buxton, who had hit it off well with Jim Morrison, said, you guys are a bunch of wimps. You'd have to drive back to L.A. We hoof it. And so that Morrison took that as a challenge. You walk all the way down this mountain and all the way down the winding road to the beach and walk along the beach and up through Beverly Hills and all the way up to Topanga Canyon. I mean, all the way up to Laurel Canyon. And so Morrison decided to up the ante, and he took off his boots. This was nighttime, it was like probably 3 a.m. or something. And he took off his boots and heaved them over the cliff and walked off into the dark. And the next day, we went down to, we're all excited about the party and everything. We're thinking, gee, I wonder if, let's go down to the Doors management office and see if they happen to have any recording contracts laying around that he'd signed,
Right.
And so we go down there, and it's like broad daylight, and there's old train tracks down, I think it was, the name of the street is slipping my mind right now, Santa Monica Boulevard maybe, but anyway, we see Jim Morrison walking up the train tracks, and he's still barefoot. And he's like, I did it. Where can I get some shoes? And so we took him over to this Buster Brown because they had Beatle boots, and even though they had buckles on them that we thought weren't cool in those days, Glenn Buxton took out his switchblade and cut the buckles off for him, and then they went out drinking. It wasn't even afternoon yet.
No socks.
Well,
just
it
boots.
might have been afternoon, but it was still broad daylight out, and they went drinking.
Oh man,
But he had slept on the beach, So we thought, okay, well, you did it barefoot, but man, you slept. We walked straight through,
there you
man.
go. New challenge.
Yeah.
So many great stories. This book is fantastic, man. I suggest everybody get it. Great book. Dennis, I could talk to you for hours and hours, man, because you're one of my, like I said, one of my favorite rock heroes. But can you ask you a couple more questions, if you don't mind?
Sure. Not at all.
When these bass lines that you played were, just freak bass lines, and they're not really scales or anything like that. How did you come up with these bass lines?
There was the mentality behind it was overcompensation, because I learned to play on a really short scale bass, and I learned to play I didn't use my pinky. So because of that, I felt like I had to go the extra mile to come up with something really unusual so that people wouldn't make fun of me for not using all of my fingers. And I never practiced scales. I'm not recommending that you don't. I'm just saying that I never did. But almost everything that I did was blues rooted in some way. I'd take a blues pattern, say like I learned from listening to Rolling Stones records, and then take it somewhere else. And the reason I started doing that is in the early days when I heard the Yardbirds, Paul Samwell Smith, he was doing they were doing blues-rooted songs, but he was doing radical bass parts. Everybody talks about the guitar players in the Yardbirds, Beck, Page, and Clapton, but Paul Samwell Smith was equally as innovative on bass. And when I heard that, it just opened my mind. Bass doesn't have to just lock in with the bass drum and hold down the bottom. I can, and Paul McCartney was influential that way too, because all of his patterns used the entire neck of the bass. So I just Glenn Buxton and I worked very closely on patterns and what notes we were going to do. We would always stand next to each other at rehearsals, and I usually stand between Glenn and Neil Smith on drums, so that I might lock into the bass drum on a certain part. I might lock into pick up on Glenn's lead guitar part. I might pick up on the vocals. And so I would just try to make the bass complement whatever I thought was the most important thing going on at that point of the song.
What was your favorite song to play?
Oh, my God. Yipers.
It has to be some that you really like playing. You probably one of them's ones that you did in the reunion and things. But my favorite, My Stars, the bass line in My Stars is great.
Okay, now there's something interesting about that. I had, the reason I wasn't drafted into the Army, Alice and I actually were called down to the draft board induction center the same day. We were a year difference in age, but what are the odds of that? Even though we both lived in Phoenix, but we went the same day. But anyway, they passed on me because I had a hernia that I didn't know I had.
Oh, lucky you.
And many years later, I had an operation to correct it. And while I was up in Toronto at the hospital, the guys wrote My Stars, and Michael was playing bass. And even though the bass pattern that's on the song isn't exactly what he played, it's heavily influenced by what Michael had come up with.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
Michael
Michael forgot all about that. I told him years later. And he was actually surprised and very proud of it after I told him.
There's also the end of $1 Billion Babies, when you do the slide, that is incredible. Is that a fretless? Did you do the slide on fretless bass? You know what I'm talking about?
No, but it was flat wound strings.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Flat wound strings.
Do you remember what that short scale bass was that you learned to play on?
It's in the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona now. It was an airline bass, which I bought from Montgomery Ward's. Glenn went to help me pick it out. And, it went through a lot of changes. I painted it and sawed parts off of it and added pickups and everything else. And then it was, the neck was broken in half during the accident that the band had in L.A. where our truck rolled over 3 times on the L.A. freeway. And then I got it repaired by Barney Kessel, the great guitar player. I didn't know that, but he was the repairman that fixed it for me. He told me not to bring it back to him anymore because all the psychedelic wiggly pictures on it gave him a headache. But it's in the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, which I highly recommend. It's an amazing museum of instruments from throughout history from all over the world.
After that, you went to a Gibson EBO?
Well, there were a few in between. I had a Framus. I had a big hollow body Framus. And then I had a couple other El Cheapo guitars because back in those days, people would steal guitars out of hotel rooms all the time. And then in '69, I got the Gibson EBO, which I added a pickup to. And I spray painted it green and glued mirrors all over it and crystal rhinestones.
Yeah, where's that bass now? You still have that?
I'm looking at it right now.
Oh,
it's
wow,
here.
Man.
It was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for over a decade, but I just got it back, and I've been playing it. That's why it's laying here on the couch.
Do bass players ever come by and just want to touch it?
I've seen bass players that raise their hands like they can't touch it. Like in Spinal Tap. Don't even look at it.
Yeah. Chuck Garrett, of all the bass players that Alice has had over the years, the one who is probably closest to your style, I think, is Chuck Garrett. Did he ask for any advice from you or any pointers?
Very little. It seems like, I think it was Greg Smith somewhere along the way. I was hanging out with Alice, and then one of the bass guys, I think it was Greg, came in and asked me about what note one of the things that always stumps me, what note are you playing here? And then I showed him, and he's like, oh, and I said, but it doesn't matter, when you're playing a live show, make it your own, man. Yeah. If you want to play like me, then don't play like anybody else, But the secret, I think, to whenever a bass player comes up to me and has a question about some pattern that I played that they weren't getting, usually if you go to a fifth to the root note, so a fifth above the root note or a fifth below the root note.
Would be the actual chord, right?
Well, yeah. I used fifths a lot. And usually I would throw it in a place where, I would always push the boundaries. So would Neil. Neil would try to come up with the craziest, unique part that he could, and I would be doing the same on bass, and then we would kind of have to back off to make it palatable to the song and support the song. But we would keep as many of those unusual things in the song as we could, whatever would work. Say like the very final chord of No More Mr. Nice Guy, da 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 da. Well, the chord is an A, but instead of playing an A like every other bass player in the entire world would do, I played an E, which is a fifth below the root note.
Right. Yeah.
And so when you hear it, it almost sounds like a different chord, and people ask me, what did you play there? Well, it's the chord that's different than the note that I played that makes it sound unusual.
So you played, did you play the A string in E open or no?
Nope, I just hit an E note.
Just the high, the E note on the A string, like the octave E?
Yeah,
Or
the
just-
E on the A string.
Okay, yeah, okay. Wow, I could geek out. Do you give bass lessons to anybody?
No, because I like what I said earlier. I just have such an unorthodox
Yeah,
playing
exactly.
style that I wouldn't want to pass on to anybody.
Yeah, well,
I do. My advice though is, do whatever you like. It's like the Alice Cooper group. The reason we were able to come up with things that were unique is because we pretty much didn't follow the rules. In fact, Glenn Buxton was the type that if you told him a rule, he's going to do something different. He will not do what he's supposed to, So, and the whole band kind of had that attitude. If somebody gave us some advice, we would use what we thought helped us, but we would throw out, a lot of things that people would tell us that, oh, you can't do that. And we would say, oh, yeah? Watch this.
who would tell you couldn't do it? Like producer guys?
Everybody.
Yeah.
In the early days, everybody.
I imagine Bob Ezrin probably tried to reel you in a lot too, right?
No, Bob, that's one of the things I really admire about him. Him walking into our world of our rehearsal room was kind of like walking into a hornet's nest, because we were all so passionate about every little tiny thing that we did that a lot of our own roadies and stuff wouldn't hang out there because it would sound like a loud argument, even though it was all just us passionately debating what we thought was the best for it was always for the right idea. It was always what's best for this
Same
part
goal.
of the song. And so when Ezrin came in, and like what I was talking about, me and Neil we could be a major distraction if you were trying to figure out the arrangement of a song, and we're over here playing all of this crazy stuff, And Ezrin was very keen on realizing the method involved in how we got to where we were, which is what he liked. The reason he was there is because he liked what we did. So he didn't come in and say, okay, well, you guys stop and just play the pocket here. Why don't you lock into the thing and let's work out. No, he'd let us go. And once in a while, I would be, I could always tell when Neil and I were getting to where we were searching for, because it would start, the closer we got, the more it started sounding like a locomotive was coming through, And Ezra, every once in a while, when we'd get close, but we'd still be a little bit hung up on something, Ezra would jump in. That's it. Like $1 Billion Babies. Rockin' Reggie came to the rehearsal room with Glenn, and it was like a Roy Orbison beautiful ballad, which was unusual for Glenn because he was always the first to say, we don't do sappy girl songs,
So $1 Billion Babies was a ballad?
It was a beautiful Roy Orbison-style ballad, which Rockin' Reggie still to this day writes a lot of great songs in Roy Orbison style. Or that's who you would compare him to if you had to compare him to anybody. But we were, and he had heard the day before that we wanted to write for the first time a title song for $1 Billion Babies album. So he had this thing, I think it was called, Devil Girl or some kind of a thing.
Right.
And we were all sitting on stools and playing it over and over and over, and it wasn't really happening. And I jumped up and said, you know what, if this is going to be the title song of this album, we got to light some dynamite under it. And everybody's looking at me like, what do you got? And I had nothing. All I knew is that. So I just went, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, and then, don, what's the next chord? Don, 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 don. And then Bob Ezrin jumped in there because one of the chords I wasn't sure where to go. And he says, okay, go, da-da-da, da, 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 da. And then he said, okay, Dennis, everybody's gonna take a break, but you show that riff to Michael and Glenn. And then Alice changed the lyrics, and it was a completely different song when we got done with it. But see, Bob Ezrin was very keen on allowing that to happen. instead of just saying, okay, we're going to fix what needs to be fixed on this song as it is. He saw that all of a sudden this, lightning struck, and he was very keen on accommodating that rather than, jumping in and trying to take over and make it go his direction.
Yeah, he knew the brilliance of you and the originality of you guys and how creative you guys were.
I think so, and it was he worked out because one of the first things that his test was, or anybody's test, whether it was somebody walking into our hotel room or backstage or anything, anybody's test with the Alice Cooper group was we would cut them to ribbons with sarcasm, and we would separate the mice from the men right off the bat. Either people would get, upset and leave or not get it or whatever, and those that could stand there and fire back a couple of zingers, okay, you're in.
Right, yeah.
And Bob Ezrin was able to do that. Glenn Buxton starts in on anybody, and you're either going to, just wither off into the corner, or you're going to stand there and get it and understand that it's humor. And that was the other thing about Bob Green's book. I know you didn't bring that up before, but I thought you had. But
Bob Green's book, are you talking about Me, Alice?
No. I'm talking about $1 Billion Baby.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I didn't read that book.
$1 Billion. It's hard to find, but I still have my copy. Bob Green was a writer for the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he came on the road with us during the $1 Billion Babies tour. But the thing about his book, one of the things that I didn't like is that it kind of focused on the negative. And some of that wasn't necessarily him trying to only pick out the negative, even though I thought he kind of did that, lean that way for a good book, Sarcasm doesn't translate into text unless you specify that we were joking, because our jokes were putting each other down,
Of course.
We did it to be funny, but if you just write it and don't say he joked or whatever, then it looks pretty, cutting. It looks mean.
And it looks like the band is falling apart. So he's there. What he thinks is watching the band coming unraveled.
Right. Well, there was an element of that, but most of that was just pure exhaustion.
Right.
And his book did not help the issue at all. His book kind of magnified all of that, because when I read Glenn saying something about me, and even though I know that what I just said, that sarcasm doesn't translate well, it comes off in black and white as being much heavier, and it has an effect.
Sure.
If Glenn says it to me right in the room, then I'm laughing, or I'm trying to think of a comeback,
It's said with out of love and just ball busting, and this guy didn't see it.
Well, he didn't specify in print that that's what it was.
Right.
And I'm not even sure if he got it. Outsider, we grew up since high school doing that, and some people didn't get it. Some people would think, God, these guys hate each other, but it wasn't that at all. It was just us trying to whittle each other down all the time. If anybody walked out of the room, if I left the room, I knew they were just cutting me to ribbons until I got back.
Right.
And
exactly.
it was like Don Rickles. Everybody's a target.
So
exactly. Don't take it personally. It's fun. Because when they walk out of the room, I'm going to do the same to them.
Yeah.
And then when you'd walk back in the room, Glenn Buxton would go, "Shh, he's back."
Yeah, quiet, here he is. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for doing this. This book, Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs, full of great stories. And if you're a fan of everybody who's a fan of the original Alice Cooper group, I'm sure has read this book. But if you have not read the book, what are you waiting for? It's fantastic. And it's out now on paperback. Thank you so much, Dennis, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Michael, do I have time for a couple of plugs?
Oh, please plug away, friend.
Oh, good. Blue Coupe are making our third album right now.
Oh, really?
I'm very
Good.
excited about that. Joe and Albert Bouchard of Blue Oyster Cult are in the band with me, and Dish and Snooky sing background with us of Manic Panic. And also, I'm very excited about this solo project that I'm doing called Cold, Cold Coffin. And we have a Kickstarter campaign that just went up yesterday, and it's going to be a video for that movie, for that song. But it's not a music video, it's more a mini film, so we're calling it a rock cinema, and it's going to star myself, Calico Cooper, and this castle. And it's scary, and it's creepy, and we've got all kinds of incentives, so check that out.
Well, I will link to the Kickstarter on the show notes of this thing. Oh, that's exciting. That's good. I was going to ask you so you got a lot going on still then.
It's crazy busy here.
Good.
It's all good. All
Good.
Creative stuff.
That's great. And of course, there's the Dennis Dunaway project that came out in 2006. Any more solo album stuff?
Well, this one, Cold Cold Coffin, is a solo.
Oh, okay. So it's a full-length album going to be as well.
Well, we started working on the album, and then I played the song for a film guy. Actually, it's Tish's husband, Peter Perenni, who got his whole. He said this song is so perfect for visuals. We've got to make it into, and it kind of took off. He got such an amazing team of people working on it. The chemistry is really great, and everybody's on the same page and all that. And it kind of snowballed into this really big deal thing happening right now, that the overall focus of working on the album kind of went a little bit to the back burner, but we're working on the album as well. So it'll be Dennis Dunaway solo. I'm calling it the Snake Charmers, and then I'm doing the Blue Coupe album.
Is Ian Hunter involved at all? No. He produced.
I don't know. Now that you mention it, I should rattle Ian's chain and see if he wants to join in. Yeah, Ian is great. He's one of my favorite guys to hang out with ever.
Yeah, and he's still putting out quality music too.
His albums are so good, and he does have his hardcore following that know about all the stuff that he puts out, but generally people have no clue that he's putting out albums that are consistently at least as good as anything he ever did.
Yeah, he's not just putting out albums, he's putting out really good albums.
Top-notch musicians from New York City, Steve Hawley, who played with Wings on drums, Andy York, who works with John Mellencamp and Bob Dylan on guitar, James Mastro. He's got the best musicians. He's got the best sense of writing songs, and and if you ever get a chance to see him live, do it. Do yourself a favor.
He's fantastic. He's fantastic. I saw him back when Mick Ronson was still alive in the band.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to talk to you, man.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
There you go. Dennis Dunaway. Man. I had a backup recorder going in case something happened with the recorder because I was so scared that something was going to get screwed up on this thing. And guess what? Sure enough, the original recorder crapped out on me halfway through the interview. So thank you, God, for giving me a backup recording device. There were some issues with the recording device, too. I had to screw with some audio to get this thing working right. But thank you so much, Dennis Dunaway, for coming on the show. And thank you, friends, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Find this show at rockandrollgeek.com. Find me on the Facebook, R&R Geek. Find me on the Twitter, R&R Geek. Find me on the Instagram, Rock and Roll Geek Don't Ask. And also, I will post links on the show notes of where you can be a part of the Kickstarter for Cold Cold Coffin, as well as where you can pick up Snakes, Guillotines, Electric Chairs. Thank you so much for listening, friends. I'm going to close out with a song. When I was doing the interview, I said one of my favorite bass lines song Alice Cooper tunes with bass is My Stars. Well, I was screwed up. What I meant to say was Blue Turk, the song before My Stars on School's Out. So that's what I'm going to close out with tonight. Here's Blue Turk from School's Out. Thank you for listening, friends. I will talk to you tomorrow.
But I love this game. You're so very ordinary. It's a rock and roll geek train wreck.